Now, This Week in Texoma.
Welcome to the program. We're joined today by State Senator Mike Shultz, Republican of Altus. We wanted to talk about the closing days of the state legislature, and if you've paid any attention to the news over the past 4 or 5 months, you know the budget has been the primary concern. Appreciate you taking the time. I know it's been a rough session. You got a little bit of a break for a couple days to kind of catch your breath and then get back at work, I'm sure, on Monday, but we appreciate you taking the time to visit with us.
David, I appreciate the opportunity to come in. It's been a different session, unusual session. They're all different. We knew going into this one we had maybe the largest budget gap we've ever had in the state's history. Certainly something that we've been working on since last summer, through the fall, through the winter, and now that we've been in session for nearly 4 months, 3.5 now, something that we've worked on every day. The last month, we've really tried to not talk about how much money we're going to spend, but try to identify some ways that we can reform some tax credit programs, reform some of the apportionment or off the top programs, and look for ways to bring a little bit more revenue into the general revenue fund, which in turn would give us a little bit more money to spend. And we're trying to determine what that is. This coming week, by next Friday, which I think is the 21st or 22nd of May, we should have identified all of those possible revenue raising measures, and then we'll spend that last week putting a general appropriations bill together, and spend that pile of money that we put together. Everybody
is, as you get closer to the end of the session, they start thinking they're not going to get it done. You know, and this is especially, we have this every year. Anybody who watches the legislature knows you guys wait until, you know, it's like finals week. You wait until the last week to get everything together. But I think because of the enormity of the whole this year, people are really starting to think, what if they run out of time and they've got to come back in June or July? What's the possibility of that? Constitution says we have to adjourn by 5 o'clock last Friday of May. Every year, everybody in April saying we're getting out early. And then the 1st of May, everybody says, oh, looks like we're going to special session. And I really think by the end of next week, we'll see this thing come together, and we'll be out on time. I don't think we'll be headed for special session this year. You mentioned it a little bit in your first answer about all the moving parts that are involved in there. Tax cuts, possibly, tax credits, different ways to do it on both sides. You got to tax a little bit, you got to revenue a little bit, you got to cut a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about some of these tax credits that you're trying to get rid of, maybe not even just on a short term, but on a longer term. Yeah, and that's what most of what we're trying to identify is not things that'll be a one-time revenue, but will be sustainable revenue as we move forward. And we've had these discussions for the 10 years I've been up there about reforming these programs. We have reformed some in the past. It's nothing new that we're doing. Probably one of the biggest ones, and we actually passed it in the Senate. It'll be headed to the floor. It's a marginal well tax incentive, and that's kind of a floating number, the way it impacts the state budget, depending on the price of oil. Last year, that was about a $4 million hit to general revenue. This year, because the price of oil being down, that was estimated it's going to cost the state about $120 to $130 million. Wow. And these are low-producing wells. You know, some of the arguments, and what the state would do would be incentivize those people to keep pumping that well when the market was telling them to stop. Some of the arguments against it were, well, if they shut it in, they'll never produce it again, which simply isn't true. They'll just turn the well off, and when the market gets better, they'll come flip it back on. If you look at it, the perspective I look at it, we should not incentivize somebody to produce a commodity at below their break-even cost. Right. And especially a commodity that's not renewable. Once that barrel of oil is extracted from the ground, or 1,000 cubic feet of gas is extracted from the ground, we don't get it back. And it doesn't make any sense to me to incentivize somebody to produce that and sell it in a depressed market when we could hold on to it and store it and sell it when the market recovers. Let's talk about some of the other things that are out there. Education, of course, is high on the list in terms of what they've had to deal with. They've been getting hit year after year after year, and then already this year, a couple of hits to them. So that's something I definitely want to cover. But another one we got to talk about is Medicaid. Hospitals and nursing homes all over Oklahoma are sounding the alarm when the director of the Healthcare Authority came out and said, big cuts are coming. Tell me where we are making progress on that. The way that the Healthcare Authority has to budget and plan for their year,
By the 1st of April each year, they have to announce to their providers what they think the projected Medicaid rates will be for the coming year. And of course, the 1st of April, Nico Gomez had to make that projection, and he made a projection of a 25% provider rate cut, which was worst case scenario. That has certainly been the front burner issue in the Capitol, at home, at Walmart, barbershop, anywhere you go, that's what people want to talk about.
Right.
And because it is devastating to providers, to facilities. Probably nursing homes are at the top of that list because they operate on extremely thin margins to begin with. Of course, our hospitals, lots of issues there. But a 25% rate cut to them is devastating. I do not think it will be 25%. I feel very comfortable in saying it will probably be more in the 10% neighborhood, and we continue to work to make it less than that.
And that's something that you said before we taped today, that's been really, whenever you guys get together to figure out topics, has been on the top of the list for the past 3 or 4 weeks. So it's not like you guys are delaying a decision. You're just trying to figure out how to put it together.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out where to come up with the funds to do it. And that's where the revenue raising measures are coming in. Every revenue raising measure that we can find, that certainly adds more dollars to what we have to spend.
Right.
And we have been working very diligently to try to restore that, try to hold that Medicaid provider rate as harmless as possible.
Right.
And I feel comfortable saying it won't be 25, it'll be 10, and I hope much less than that.
One of the things that's kind of that we talk about all the time is education. What kind of cuts are they going to be getting? They've already had revenue cuts to get them out of this fiscal year. They're really bracing for worst case scenario for next year too.
Yeah, all agencies, as we went through this current fiscal year that we're in, all agencies that receive appropriated dollars took mandatory cuts because of a revenue failure, which means we did not collect as much money into general revenue as we projected a year ago, and those are automatic across the board cuts that everybody takes an equal percentage, and then anybody that has off the top or apportioned monies also takes cuts because those funds aren't receiving as much money as anticipated as well. So all state agencies have taken cuts up to this point. Speaker and the Pro Tem both made a commitment over a month ago that we would hold common education to less than a 5% cut. We will hold to that. They will be less than 5, and I believe at the end of the day will probably be pretty close to 0. If you look over the course of what we've done the last 6 to 8 years when we've had to cut, we've worked very diligently to hold Common Ed to lower cuts on that part of their monies than other state agencies. We appropriate to them about $2.3 to $2.4 billion, certainly the highest dollar amount that we appropriate to any group. But at the end of the day, I think Common Ed will see nearly a 0 cut to their budget. Certainly will be less than 5%, and I do believe will be less than any other state agency will receive as a percentage.
Department of Corrections made some news in the last week whenever they announced that they wanted to close the inmate work centers that are all across the state. I think there's 15 of them. 8 of them are in our corner of the state, and so that has supposedly helped alleviate some budget problems with DOC, but the trickle-down effect is we've got a lot of cities that are now going to be out of some labor that they've come to depend on.
Yeah, probably the most surprising thing to that is how quiet that was kept until it happened.
Right.
I actually had a meeting set up with Director Allball last Thursday morning at 8:30 that I didn't know what it was, and about 15 minutes prior to that meeting, when my phone started ringing about the news reports that were breaking, I then realized what that meeting was about, and he came into my office to tell me their plan to close these work centers, move all of the work center people to Granite, take all of the population at Granite and move it to Sayre.
Right.
And which meant the Sayre facility was going to reopen under DOC control and management, and then also in conjunction with that, and certainly a bright spot for the folks in Sayre was that also meant that their hospital would reopen as well. And but for the rest of the communities that have these work release centers, certainly something that they're going to have to deal with, certainly detrimental to what's going on in their communities and what's happening. Discussions are continuing to happen. I know there's another meeting coming up, a group of legislators in officials from the Oklahoma Municipal League are going to get together, city managers, mayor is going to talk through this. I'm hopeful that there's still some wiggle room in this, and there's a solution to be found that will work for everybody.
And I think that's kind of what they wanted to be just involved. That's what we heard across the board was this.
Just keep us informed.
Yeah, the idea of being blindsided by the whole thing was just, really kind of, hey, they wanted some input, so it's encouraging to know that maybe they've got a chance to tweak that a little bit.
Yes.
We only got a couple of minutes left. I want to let people know that if they missed it a couple of weeks ago, a pretty significant election in the Senate. Senator Shultz has been the majority leader, but he was elected the President Pro Tem designee. The current President Pro Tem of the Senate is term limited out, right? And so so you're going to be in charge of the Senate once all the procedural votes happen after the general election. Tell me a little bit about that whole process and what it means to you.
Something is certainly very overwhelming, something that's very humbling, very honoring, that my friends that I serve with in our caucus selected me to be their leader for the next 2 years. Not anything that I thought 10 years ago when the people of Southwest Oklahoma wanted me to go represent them. Certainly not anything that I thought would happen, but doors open and opportunities arise. I'm looking forward to the opportunity, a lot of challenges. A lot of people have asked me, how bad it's going to be in the next 2 years. Yes, I do, and I want to do it. I try to farm for a living, and if I wasn't someone who embraced challenge and opportunity, if I was someone who ran from problems, I would have stopped farming the first year I started. So I know we have an uphill task in front of us, but want to be part of it, want to be part of the solution. We've had great leadership through the years, and look forward to continuing that.
Well, it's a great moment for Southwest Oklahoma as well. As we talked as we were taping, we've had some high leadership positions in the State House before. Representative T.W. Shannon, Lloyd Benson of Frederick, Representative Glover from Elgin. But in terms of the Senate, we've never had anyone in this high ranking of a position, as far as we can tell, at least in recent memory, but maybe in the history of the state Senate. So it's a really great moment for the whole corner of the state.
It is, and like I say, again, very humbling, very honored that my friends think this much of me. I think. I've told a lot of people I hope a year from now we're still all excited about this selection, but certainly looking forward to the opportunity.
Well, congratulations again. Appreciate you taking the time to keep us updated on the budget process. We'll be in touch with you over the next couple of weeks, I'm sure, to see how things work out at the state capitol.
Very good.
We're joined now by Lawton City Manager Jerry Ihler. We wanted to take a little bit of time to give you an update on what's going on with the city. And there's been a recent move by the city to identify some things that needed to become priorities for the community. So we're going to go through those in detail, hopefully, here over the next couple of segments, and appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk with us. A little bit of background with you. You've been city manager a relatively short time, but you've been in the city government of Lawton for quite some time. For the folks who aren't really familiar with your background, just give us a quick kind of biography there.
Well, I've been with the city for, it'll be 33 years come August, and my first stint was a project engineer for the engineering department. I did that for about 8 years, and then I did leave for a short period of time and came back, and as the city engineer and public works director, I did that for about 25 years. And about a year ago, I was moved up to the city hall and became the assistant city manager for about 30 days, and then, and then became the city manager. So I've been city manager for about 11 months.
How's that transition been for you?
It's quite a change, a little bit different, but I've learned a lot.
Let's talk a little bit about what I mentioned in the intro in terms of these priorities. Give me the background for what was behind this kind of mission that you kind of the city has kind of been on in terms of trying to develop some of these priorities that wanted to get the city's attention.
Sure. As the city was moving forward with the 2015 sales tax extension and the 2016 CIP program that was passed last year, the Mayor Fitch and the city manager at that time and some of the community leaders decided to go ahead and put together a priority list. And they picked what they felt were the top 5 priorities for the community, and I believe there was a couple of public meetings where the public had input as to what they felt was a priority. And essentially the number 1 priority that the community had voiced was public safety. And essentially public safety and how we can create a safer city for our citizens. And their second priority, as you recall, we went through some drought conditions from 2010 to 2015, was how can we diversify our water supply and provide enough supply to be able to sustain growth as well as be able to grow, if you will, as an economic development, as we look at economic development.
And then number 3, closely monitoring Fort Sill's relationship, and that's got to be something that, I mean, it's always in the back of our minds, especially whenever we're looking at BRAC and the Army's overall reduction in troops, that kind of thing.
Exactly, and that, as you said, that was the third priority, and it dealt exactly with the sequestration with regards to the reduction in troops and how that would affect the community. And our community leaders addressed that issue with the congressional delegation in Washington, and we'll get into that later as the result of that, but it's turned out very positive for the city.
The other things that are on the list, monitoring the fiscal health of the city's general fund budget, and that's something that you guys struggle with on a yearly basis, it seems like, and cities across the country are having to deal with that, with the economy's ebb and flow, and then kind of connected to the water thing that we had too, in terms of that, since that's such a major revenue flow. And then the last thing was to build lasting relationships with citizens and community partners, whether it's government, tribal, whatever, and just trying to build a stronger community. Let's go back to that first one, talking about public safety programs, because that's something that did generate an awful lot of attention whenever you were crafting that CIP/public safety tax. Go remind people of some of the things that were on there. Wanted more pay for police, right?
That's
Higher
correct. One of the things that we were addressed to, or tasked with addressing, was essentially to help with the recruitment for the police department and be able to have retention with the existing police officers. And one of the problems that we had was the pay. Starting salary for our police officers was lower than most of Oklahoma. And so one of the things we were tasked with was increasing that pay so that we could recruit better. We were having a lot of vacancies as a result of the pay, and as I said, retention. Officers were leaving and going to other communities after they would get some training with the City of Lawton. And so in January of this past year, or January of this year, we did come to an agreement with the police union as well as the fire union, and we were able to raise the starting salary for police officers at the entry level a little over 16%. And then in addition to that, to help with retention of existing officers, we were able to provide an incentive payment of $2,500 for each of the existing officers. And we did a similar agreement with the fire department. We were able to raise their pay. We did get a 2-year agreement with the fire department, and they also received the $2,500 incentive as well as
And you mentioned the 2-year agreement, but with the police, it was 1 year, and because of kind of a lag that's been going on, that deal is going to run out here coming up pretty quickly. And I know you've been in negotiations, the city has, with the next one that's going to expire pretty soon. So I know you can't really go into a whole lot of that detail since it is, in negotiation phase at this point. But we know that's ongoing, and we're presuming that that's still high priority, trying to figure out a way to address their concerns regarding that.
It's still a high priority to address the pay as well as benefits and how we can retain officers.
We were talking about public safety programs and how that led to a CIP sales tax that was approved by voters that increased pay, and it also provided a lot of funding for a public safety facility. And quite frankly, and anybody who's been around that Lawton Police Department, the building itself knows that station was in dire need of change, and so that's one thing that's happening here. So give people a little update on where we are with that, because getting pretty close to turning dirt, hopefully, right? Well,
we're in the middle of the design phase right now. Basically, what we're looking at is, as a public safety facility, we're designing a new police station and new jail with that. We're also putting in the municipal court because they all work together. And then we also have a fire station at this location. The location is at just on the south side of Gore Boulevard, from Gore south to B Avenue, between Railroad Street and Lawrence Street.
And that fire station, is that going to replace Central Fire Station that's downtown? Will it augment it? How will that work?
It will replace the station from the standpoint of the firefighters. But the administration for the fire department, they still will be housed in the Central Fire Station.
And if that project does get underway, let's say hopefully by sometime early 2017, what kind of a timeline would you expect, weather permitting, that would be presented or completed? Because it's an awfully large building.
Yes, it is. We anticipate, as you said, construction to start just after the first of the year, and then about an 18-month construction time if things go well, weather permitting.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. And we did have recently, just this past week, we had groundbreaking for Fire Station number 8, and that was the first, I didn't realize it had been that long, but the first additional fire station to address the expanding population since 1980.
Yes.
That's really amazing. But I mean, I guess you kind of have to wait to see where populations develop, though, before you can put a fire station in place. So you kind of have to be behind the population curve on that to some degree, right?
And fire stations are based on response time.
Right.
And that's the area that we felt would address best response for the entire southwestern community.
Let's talk about water. That's something that was in everyone's mind for the last 3 or 4 years until the floods hit last May, and then the drought conditions were wiped out, filled everything back up. But still, the notion of water conservation, the need to expand water resources, clearly was something that needed to be addressed. Let people know some of the things we're looking at there.
Certainly, as a result of the drought from 2010 to 2015, we were very pleased that, if you recall, last May, we received a lot of rain, and we've had a lot of rain ever since then, and the voters still, after all that rain in August, approved sales tax. And so essentially what we're looking at with that is we did a feasibility study identifying what areas we wanted to look at. And if you think of your water supply, what we look at, and you'll hear me say often in presentations, it's just like your portfolio for your stock. You want to diversify. Right now, 100% of our water is raw water from lake supply. And so we're looking at groundwater, drilling some wells as a potential, as well as we're looking at reuse from our wastewater treatment plant.
And that would be something that was brought up before. Wichita Falls, our friends down there, have been through that before, but that's quite a project.
It can be a very expensive process. But when you look at the alternative, like Wichita Falls, they were down to 15–10% of their water supply.
Right.
When you look at the alternative not having, then you pay the money to be able to have that water supply, because without water, it's tough. And
there's also, I guess, emerging technologies out there too to help find leakage. I was reading something the other day from Las Vegas, where, I mean, that's a city that's really kind of in the middle of a desert, and they are kind of on the cutting edge of all that. But in terms of finding ways so that whatever water you do have isn't somehow disappearing either into the ground or whatever, so I guess that's something else.
There are a lot of leak detection devices to find areas where maybe a pipe is leaking. So
that'll be a good thing. And again, the conservation methods have gotten already into people's heads, and so if you kind of look at the city's water revenues have been down, so it's a good thing that people are conserving and they think about it, but it kind of hits the city's pocketbook at the same time, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. We spent 5 years telling them conserve, 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 and now that we're through the drought and we have full lakes, we want to tell you use, use, use.
Right. It's a tough message to deliver to people.
Exactly.
We only have about a minute left. We're going to run out of time to get through all the things on the list, but tell me a little bit about that relationship between Lawton and Fort Sill. This is something that's been ongoing for several years when Bracken sequestration hit.
Right. Essentially, again, the community leaders from the chamber, from the city, our partners at Fort Sill, work very hard to try to address the impact that troop reductions would have on the community of Lawton. And they did a very good job when they went to Washington and talked to the congressional delegation. And as a result, Fort Sill was one of only 2 or 3 bases that actually increased in number of troops. The first, we received 2 battalions as of about an increase of 800 troops. And the first battalion is in the process of coming on board now and moving in. The next battalion will be next October. We'll see that second battalion coming in. So we've actually seen an increase of about 800, or will see an increase of about 800 troops.
And that speaks well to the relationship of former soldiers who come back to speak well of
Right.
Lawton to try to maintain that relationship between Fort Sill and Lawton. Mr. Ihler, we appreciate you taking the time. We ran out of time, but open invitation for you to come back, and we'll talk more about the things going on with the city, all right?
My pleasure.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
City Manager Jerry Ihler has been our guest. We hope you guys see you guys next time.
If you have a topic or issue you'd like us to focus on, please write to the address on your screen or fax us at 357-3811. Or you can email us.